Actualité.
After Edinburgh, Belfast, a United Kingdom where the monarch plays the symbolic role of unifying figure. The new King of Great Britain and Northern Ireland has arguably a taller order there than in Scotland, where nationalists so far want to keep the crown with or without independence. Charles fully understands what's at stake. As Prince of Wales, he visited Northern Ireland 39 times. He lived through the Troubles, saw his late mother play the role of reconciliator during a historic state visit to Dublin in 2011, and grasps what may be a turning point today, with nationalists for the first time edging out Unionists in recent regional assembly elections. Unionists who've since boycotted Northern Ireland's power-sharing government. What role for the new king? What role for a brand new prime minister, one who campaigned on the pledge of picking a fight with the EU over the post-Brexit agreement that puts a border in the Irish Sea? We'll ask our panel about the olive branch offer floated by Brussels this week. Could Liz Truss's decision on that go so far as to chart the course that Northern Ireland chooses? Today in the France 24 debate, we're wondering if the monarchy can keep it together. Joining us from Belfast is Katie Hayward, Professor of Political Sociology at Queen's University Belfast. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And we're joined here in the studio by Jeremy Stubbs, Deputy Editor of the News Weekly or Monthly? Monthly, Causeur. Thank you for being with us.
Hello.
The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation, and you have on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. It's about the new king who's now returned to London, and it's about his late mother, Ireland's president and prime minister, among those crossing the border to Belfast. Same with the new PM, Liz Truss, who went there. Kathy Clifford has more.
Touching down in Belfast, King Charles III set out on his first visit to Northern Ireland as monarch. Crowds lined the streets to greet the royal convoy, the king stopping off to greet well-wishers. A gun salute marked his arrival at Hillsborough Castle, the royal family's official residence in Northern Ireland. Speaking to a nation deeply divided over the royal family, the king said he hopes to honour his mother's legacy there.
With that shining example before me, and with God's help, I take up my new duties resolved to seek the welfare of all the inhabitants of Northern Ireland.
The Queen's visit to Ireland in 2011 and her handshake a year later with former IRA commander Martin McGuinness were seen as huge steps towards cementing the peace process. The House Speaker from the main nationalist party Sinn Féin paid tribute to these gestures.
She personally demonstrated how individual acts of positive leadership can help break down barriers and encourage reconciliation. Queen Elizabeth showed that a small but significant gesture, a visit, a handshake, crossing the street, or speaking a few words of Irish can make a huge difference in changing attitudes and building relationships.
Sinn Féin boycotted the proclamation of the new king, but agreed to meet him and attend some events. The king met with leaders of other faith communities ahead of a remembrance service for the Queen at Anglican Cathedral St Anne's, also attended by UK Prime Minister Liz Truss and Irish President Michael Higgins. The visit comes as Unionists loyal to the Crown feel their place in the wider UK is under increasing threat, with the Nationalists set to lead the devolved government in Belfast for the first time.
Katie Hayward, what was the feeling today in Belfast? Were you paying attention if you were a Republican, or just ignoring the events unfolding?
I mean, it would have been very difficult to ignore the unfolding events because they very much affected what's happening around Belfast, even including traffic control, of course, and the media is covering it almost full time. So everybody is paying attention. Obviously, people have different reactions to it. But I think most striking are the images from St Anne's Cathedral, where we saw the Taoiseach from the south, the Irish Prime Minister, the Irish President, the new British Prime Minister, and of course King Charles, all meeting together in that one cathedral, surrounded by political leaders of all hues in Northern Ireland. So simply the physical being together in the same place is really important at a time of great uncertainty and particular tension in the British-Irish relationship. So that was significant. And of course, we also had King Charles in Hillsborough Castle being addressed, as you saw there, by Alex Maskey of Sinn Féin, producing his own form of positive leadership, I think, in acknowledging the significance of the moment and indeed the King's loss and the grief of particularly the Unionist community at this time. So it's a really important moment, and it seems to have been handled with great sensitivity across the board.
Yeah, it is. This is what question people are asking on this side of the channel is: does it matter who the monarch is? Is this just protocol, or did Charles bring his own touch to all of this?
Well, he has been here many times before, so he's a familiar figure in that regard. But obviously, the idea that he's king now is a significant change, and as was mentioned in your report there, the Queen was widely acknowledged as having paid a significant contribution to processes of reconciliation. Very importantly, her visit in 2011 to the Republic of Ireland was really seen as a critical moment in sort of marking the new phase of the British-Irish relationship and how far that had come. King Charles is different. In particular, he's seen differently in the Unionist community here because the Queen was very much associated with her Christian faith. That's very important to many Unionists. He's different in that regard, and it'll be interesting to see the degree to which he emphasises that going forward. He is a very different character to his mother, and an unknown in terms of how he's going to govern at what is a really interesting and significant time of change in the UK. Of course, we mustn't forget we've got a new Prime Minister now, and she's a huge unknown. So there's an awful lot of uncertainty going forward, particularly from the point of view of Northern Ireland at this time.
And we'll talk about that new Prime Minister in a short while. I want to welcome to our conversation economist Graham Gudgeon, former special advisor to the First Minister of Northern Ireland, David Trimble. Thank you so much for joining us from Cambridge. You just heard there Katie Hayward describe that Charles and Elizabeth don't have the same personality. How does Charles's figure, as she said, a well-known figure in Northern Ireland, play?
Oh, I think he'll play well enough. He's been to Northern Ireland, I think, about 40 times now. He's, of course, very well known, having been the heir apparent for so many years. So nobody can quite replace Queen Elizabeth, who was so well regarded, not only in Northern Ireland, but across the UK and across the world. So Charles will have his work cut out in the sense to live up to that position. But I don't see any great difficulties as far as Northern Ireland is concerned. He's well known and well regarded. I think things will go well.
I think things that will go well. Ever since last Friday's announcement of the Queen's death, well, Unionists have been paying tribute, like, for instance, on Belfast's Shankill Road.
We were devastated when we heard of her passing, and I think the amount of flowers reflects how much she meant to us. I think the Queen epitomised for me everything it meant to be British, but she also knew how important it was to put that hand out, reach that hand out of friendship. We saw that when she met Martin McGuinness.
That nod to the 2012 handshake between Martin McGuinness, the former head of the IRA, and the Queen. The Queen, who had felt the IRA personally, what with the 1975 assassination of Lord Mountbatten. Joining us is Declan de Bredon, historian, a columnist for the Irish News, the author of Power Play, The Rise of Modern Sinn Féin. Thank you for being with us from Dublin. What's your reaction when you hear that Unionists pay tribute to Elizabeth's role in brokering peace?
Yes, well, I think it's undeniable that she did play a role in brokering peace. She went out of her way. She came here to Dublin in 2011 and astonished everyone because she went to a place called the Garden of Remembrance, which is set up in honour of people who fought and died for Irish independence. And she went there and bowed her head, which was seen as a remarkable gesture.
And just to remind our viewers, Dego, this was the first visit by a monarch, a British monarch, to the Republic of Ireland since independence.
Yes, and in fact, she was very anxious to come here. You know, she told one of our prime ministers, you know, I've been to Australia 21 times and I've never been to the Republic of Ireland, you know. And I think she knew she could play a critical role in the peace process, you know, and she also made a speech in Dublin during that visit where she actually began with an introduction in the Irish language, which blew everyone away, to be quite honest. And she really earned a lot of brownie points, so to speak, for her performance. And a year later in Belfast, you know, I was there, I was outside the building. She shook hands with Martin McGuinness, who was generally believed to have been the head of the IRA for 4 years, and you know, deeply immersed in that Republican movement. So she shook hands with him, and which you know, given the fact that the IRA had killed her husband, or not her husband, I'm sorry, her cousin, Lord Mountbatten, uncle of her husband, with a bomb on a fishing boat back in August '79. It was her attitude was seen as very generous.
Attitude seen as very generous. Of course, Jeremy Stubbs, when these tributes to the Queen are pouring in, when we saw the same Thanksgiving service that we saw over in Edinburgh on Monday. What we didn't see, and this gives perhaps a view towards the task that lies ahead for both King and Prime Minister, is we didn't see a meeting at the Regional Assembly. That's because it's not sitting right now. There's political gridlock again in Belfast.
Yes, indeed. I mean, we've seen tremendous scenes there of emotion, of dialogue, of meeting, of exchanges, gathering together. But beneath it all remains the very specific and concrete problem of the Northern Irish Protocol. And in a sense, Charles can help a little bit on that question. No doubt he will be, as we know, a bit more outspoken and interventionist than his mother.
You're sure of that?
It seems to be the case. I mean, he may be a little bit more outspoken in those private conversations with the new Prime Minister every week. He may wish to point up the need, the necessity to advance on that. But on the other hand, his presence there is important, but it's a bit tricky because he's got to give Unionists, those Unionists who really want to feel a link with Britain, the sense that he is there for them. But he mustn't alienate anyone else in the population. He must give the impression that he's there for all Northern Irish people. So he can do good, but it's a tricky move to make. And I think people will be waiting to see what happens on that Northern Ireland protocol in the days and weeks to come.
Graham Gudgeon, how does he walk that tightrope?
I don't think it matters very much. I don't really agree with this. I think Charles is going to have to be very careful to be politically neutral. He has been reasonably outspoken as heir to the throne, as Prince of Wales. And I think because of that, people are going to be watching him quite carefully to make sure that he isn't overtly political. So he certainly won't say anything in public. Whether he gives a view in private, well, we'll probably never know, or we won't know for a long time. But I don't think that will matter very much. I don't think his view will carry any special weight. And he won't have any special insights into what is obviously very difficult and intransigent problems.
And the stakes arguably are higher on this trip to Belfast than they were in Edinburgh on Monday, because we heard the Nationalist leader, First Minister there, Nicola Sturgeon, who made it clear that her party is in favour of keeping the monarchy with an independent Scotland. Of course, what Sinn Féin is arguing for, Graham Gudgeon, is reunification with the rest of Ireland.
They are indeed. But they've been very careful about the death of the Queen and the accession of the new king. I think that probably reflects a good deal of admiration among their own supporters, particularly for Queen Elizabeth, perhaps less so for Charles. So rather like Nicola Sturgeon in Scotland, they're treading very carefully on this and being very, very well behaved. So of course you're quite right. Their long-term aim is a united Ireland, but they're not going to say anything very negative or difficult about the forthcoming funeral or the forthcoming accession for the time being. They're attending some gatherings and meetings and politely and I think quietly staying away from others, but not upsetting anybody very much.
Katie Hayward, correct me if I'm wrong, but Sinn Féin is going to be represented at the funeral in London.
Yes, Michelle O'Neill has said she's going to be attending, and of course she's attending as First Minister designate, so Sinn Féin was the largest party coming out of the elections that we had there to the Northern Ireland Assembly in May. She hasn't been able to take up that seat because the executive hasn't been able to sit, because it's been boycotted, as you mentioned, by the Democratic Unionist Party, who came in as second largest. So we've got a really tense political situation here in Northern Ireland. The Northern Ireland Protocol, as has already been mentioned, is relevant to that and is very pertinent to the debate here. But yes, Sinn Féin are trying to show a leadership role here. There's discomfort and some disquiet amongst some of its supporters, but primarily this is an opportunity for Sinn Féin to show responsibility. Looking ahead, if it wants united Ireland, according to the terms of the Good Friday Belfast Agreement, it will continue to have to recognise the British national identity of many still in the north of Ireland, and that Britishness and Irishness of Northern Ireland is, of course, what makes it quite unique and what continues to have to be balanced in Northern Ireland, not just on the political scene, but also, as we're seeing right at this moment, in cultural and social terms as well. So all of these things come together at what is a really interesting 10 days in the UK scene.
Yeah, so a tightrope act for the new monarch, a tightrope act for Republicans in Northern Ireland, and a tightrope act for the new UK Prime Minister. It's been exactly a week since Liz Truss became PM. She had spent all summer pledging a renegotiation of the post-Brexit trade deal that puts a border in the Irish Sea, this to respect the Good Friday Agreement that's coming up on 25 years now, one that guarantees an open land border between the two Irelands.
I took on responsibility for negotiating the Northern Ireland Protocol, and against a lot of advice in Whitehall, and against the wishes of some of the people that you've mentioned. And I would be very clear with people like Nancy Pelosi exactly what I think about this and exactly what we need to do. I have got on with delivering this.
So in those remarks made in August when she was campaigning to become Conservative Party leader, there you hear Liz Truss with a bit of a dig, Jeremy Stubbs, at the Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives. We've heard the U.S. President, who's proud of his Irish origins, who's been outspoken, telling whoever's in charge in Britain that they must respect the Good Friday agreements, i.e., keep that land border open between the two Irelands.
Well, we see there Liz Truss in campaign mode, and she may be somewhat different in government mode. We'll have to wait and see. It is clear, though, that the British government cannot and will not do anything to jeopardise the land border. The whole question resides with the sea border. And that is where the tensions are. That is where Liz Truss needs to advance and make progress. We've had some further indications from the European Union that they are really very willing to compromise.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because we got what looks very much like an olive branch from Brussels on Monday, an interview in the Financial Times, the EU Commissioner Maroš Šefčovič offering up what's being billed as invisible checks. Only a select few vehicles would be stopped and searched, saying he spelled out specifics in the interview. When there's reasonable suspicion of illegal trade, smuggling, illegal drugs, or dangerous toys or poisoned food, that would be a check. But it would typically be a couple of lorries a day. What do you make of the timing of that announcement?
Probably impeccable, because in a sense, the events at the moment have raised the whole tone of political dialogue momentarily. And it would be a great shame, for example...
So there's a window of opportunity for everyone to take the high road.
There is a window of opportunity, and the first one to take the low road will, I think, acquire a negative reputation because of that. So I would say there's a lot of pressure on the current British government to accept that olive branch as far as is possible.
Graham Goodgen, you agree?
Not at all. The UK government has said that there's nothing really very new in the latest EU overture. It's a restatement of previous positions. And as you know, the UK government is passing legislation through the UK Parliament. It's now in the House of Lords. It's gone through the Commons, which will allow UK ministers to override any significant aspects of the protocol.
She's going to stick to her guns.
Yes, she is. Both sides, I think, are being very cautious. There's a very careful dance going on both sides. Both the EU and the UK government are not wanting to push this.
But this offer of invisible checks, doesn't it allow both sides to save face?
Not really. No, as I say, there's nothing very new in it. It would still leave a position where all goods coming into Northern Ireland from Great Britain need to fill out customs declarations. There are something like 1 million customs declarations a year currently being having to be declared. All that would continue. Northern Ireland would still stay under EU regulations, including new regulations, without any representation in Brussels. So most of the panoply of the protocol would remain, and most of what really irks and upsets the Unionists in Northern Ireland would still be there. So there's no great advance here.
No great advance. Declan de Bredon, sitting where you are in Dublin, what's the feeling?
I think there's a bit of optimism creeping into the air at the moment, that with a new Prime Minister in Britain and the concessionary note struck by Maroš Šefčovič, the actual practicalities are not insoluble. Liz Truss, when she was Foreign Secretary, was putting through legislation which provided for a green lane for trusted traders who wouldn't be subject to any customs checks, because they would be trusted when they said that their goods were only staying in Northern Ireland and they were not going across the Irish border and into the European Union. And then there would be a red lane, which was for goods, which is a fairly small quantity of goods actually coming from Britain through Northern Ireland into the European Union across the Irish border. And there would be a red lane which would examine them and subject them to customs checks. So, I mean, that is quite similar to proposals that have come from the other side, from at least elements on the other side. And really, as our former Taoiseach Prime Minister Bertie Ahern said, the two sides really need to sit around the table. I covered the Good Friday Agreement negotiations, and there were moments when an agreement seemed impossible. But people just sat around the table, and the two prime ministers of Ireland and Britain, banged heads together and so on. So I would be cautiously optimistic about a settlement of that at the moment.
All right, Katie Hayward, there you hear Declan talking about optimism beginning to creep in when it comes to some kind of a settlement between Britain's brand new Prime Minister and the European Union. But you also heard Graham Gudgeon say, good luck selling it to the Unionists in Northern Ireland. Can they be brought on board? Will they be left behind?
So I think there are three different aspects to the so-called Northern Ireland Protocol problem. So there's a problem in terms of the practicalities of implementing it. So there are the checks and controls on goods coming across the Irish Sea. As Declan has already mentioned, there's a lot of common ground in what the UK and the EU sides are proposing. So there is definitely a potential for a landing zone there. Then there's the problem of principle. So this is primarily around the question of UK sovereignty. And you've seen, including in that Northern Ireland Protocol bill that's been put forward by the UK government, trying to address that principle of sovereignty, particularly with respect to the role of the European Court of Justice, which the protocol bill would completely take out of the question when it comes to governing Northern Ireland's operation of the protocol looking ahead. And then the third problem is possibly, of course, the most difficult, and that's the political problem. And a lot of this is connected to expectations, particularly amongst unionists, with respect to what's possible. So consistently, as we've seen from the beginning of the debate around Brexit and its impact on the island of Ireland, people across the board here in Northern Ireland have said they don't want a harder border, north, south or east, west. They don't want any change, even those who voted leave and wanted Brexit. So trying to have a situation in which Northern Ireland's legal status does change. Its relationship with the Republic of Ireland has changed because it's no longer in the EU, and the protocol does mean changes in its trading relationship with Britain. That has changed. How can we minimise the effect of that? And politically, it's really, really tricky. And this is what the new Prime Minister has to manage. The expectations from her own party, given the rhetoric produced so far.
So let me just ask you on that, because you have the Unionists who, for the first time ever, are in the minority in the Northern Irish Assembly after those recent elections. Are they managing those expectations, as you say, or are they doubling down?
The straightforward answer is that they are doubling down. So this is particularly from the Democratic Unionist Party, the more hardline Unionist Party, although there are concerns amongst the majority of Unionists with respect to what the protocol means politically and constitutionally. But for the time being, the DUP, the Democratic Unionist Party, has taken a hard line, in some way, we have to say, encouraged by the British government and the approach it's taken to the protocol in its confrontation or difference with the EU on this. And essentially, basically, they've given rise to this idea that it is possible really not to have a border, or for the border question to be a problem only for the EU. But you can't get around the fact that, of course, leaving the EU requires some checks and controls somewhere. So I do think we've seen movement, significant movement from the EU. The question is, can that be met on the other side? And as I say, in practical terms, now's the chance for a new chapter for talks to happen. But as has already been said, simply sitting around a table together would make a big difference. And I think, as I mentioned at the very beginning, seeing those people in the same cathedral as it happened to be today, and then in the same room in Hillsborough Castle, that's really important. And more of that needs to happen if we're to make any progress on what is ultimately a relationship that we're talking about.
Seeing political adversaries together in that cathedral in Belfast, Graham Gudgeon, when it comes to the practicalities, how do you bring the DUP to come together for a compromise with on this?
Well, I don't think we're going to get a compromise. I mean, the UK government has set out its position, and the DUP has said it won't go back into the Assembly without that bill becoming law and indeed put into practice. So I think that's where the UK government is going. And sitting down.
I asked the question because we had a promise once before that the UK government would stand by the DUP, and then Boris Johnson signed the post-Brexit trade deal.
Well, he had to. I mean, that was a moment of weakness. The UK Parliament was very badly split, and Boris Johnson was in a position whereby it looked as if Brexit might be lost altogether unless he signed up to this. So he did sign up. But it was, in a sense, the EU asked for too much at a period of UK weakness, and this is coming back to bite them now. This is going to have to be sorted out. And it'll have to be sorted out in such a way as goods going into Northern Ireland and staying in Northern Ireland don't cross a customs border. They don't need any declarations. They don't need any checks. There's no real reason why they should. And we're going to have to get to that position at some point. But the EU is going to have to change its negotiating mandate for Šefčovič. At present, he hasn't got a mandate, so sitting down and talking about it doesn't get you anywhere. So something will have to give. And at present, it looks like the UK has got the whip hand because at present the protocol is damaging the Good Friday Agreement. And if you read the protocol, it's full of aspirations that it will support the Good Friday Agreement. It's clearly not doing so. And so we're going to have to get to a position whereby the DUP will go back in and we can carry on with the Good Friday Agreement.
Declan de Bredden, do you agree?
Well, there is a law that if the power-sharing government isn't reformed, re-established by the 28th of October, that there will have to be another election in Northern Ireland. And I don't think the DUP would be wildly enthusiastic about that, seeing as they ended up as the second biggest party last time. So I think there is reason and motivation for the DUP to be a bit flexible. I think the EU needs to be a lot more active and engaged, and it's good that Šefčovič is back on the stage. And I think the actual legislation, as I said, that the British are putting through, in practical terms, it's manageable. If the politicians are meant to come up with a fudge, and that's the challenge for the two sides now. Come up with a fudge that makes both sides happy and doesn't commit anybody to ultra dogmatic courses of action.
What about in the longer term, Jeremy Stubbs? What does the future hold for Northern Ireland?
Well, I think we can say that if the EU is not a signatory to the Belfast agreements, and if things don't work, it's the UK government that will be on the hook, and the UK government needs to manage its image on this, as on many other things. I think also that there will already be a long-term message from Prince Charles, very subtle in private, to the current Prime Minister, which is, look, my realms haven't felt so together for a very long time. Please keep it that way. So there is considerable pressure on the British government to take positive action of some sort.
Except when those energy prices keep rising during the winter, could it be a useful distraction for a prime minister who will shore up support among the more hardline elements of her base by taking on the EU and making a stand?
I'm afraid it won't be enough. That's the problem. The general disappointment
is making peace in her interest with the EU.
Oh, very much so. Very much so. Because,
politically, I ask.
Because all eyes will be on the bills. So anyone who tries to distract with something else, it's just not going to work, I don't think. So we've got to go beyond the grandstanding and come up with practical solutions in Northern Ireland, but also for those energy bills.
All right, let me turn to the sociologists in the room here. Katie Hayward, it's been 70 years, of course, for a 70-year reign for Queen Elizabeth. We're not going to have time to go over the long arc of history, how things have changed where you are. But if you look at the short to medium term, what do you see happening on Charles's watch?
Oh my goodness me. I mean, there's an awful lot at stake here, and there's a great sense of uncertainty. So if you talk to people here from different communities, there's a great sense of just feeling unsettled. There's a lot of, it's unsettling where we are at the moment, whichever way you look. And of course, most particularly, people are worried about the coming winter and what it means. And for Northern Ireland in particular, the fuel poverty rates are the highest in the UK and the disposable income is the lowest in the UK. So there's a great sense of vulnerability. Most particularly if you look at younger people, I think, and we mustn't lose sight of them and their concerns. And they are also concerned in particular around climate change and what that means and how unable, it seems, our local politicians are to be able to respond to those challenges. And they're also concerned around mental health and well-being. I think this, particularly post-COVID, is a big crisis that needs to be addressed. So there's this whole horrible sense of disjuncture, I think, between a lot of the sort of seemingly abstract discussions that surround questions of sovereignty and monarchy. And
are you saying, Katie, that we're having an old person's argument?
No, why would I say that? No, but I think it's important, actually, if we are talking around the role of the head of state and the head of government, and indeed of political leaders, to think, well, actually, what really matters here? And perhaps this is a moment to think, what does Northern Ireland need? So for all the talk of peace and the future and reconciliation, perhaps a more positive starting point, instead of thinking of borders and unification and institutional change, is to think, well, what do particularly young people want, and how are we delivering on that? And of course, there's a lot of common ground in that regard. And that would be a good point to start from, I think.
Graham Gudgeon, again, we're coming up on 25 years since the Good Friday agreements. When you look at the long arc of it and you look ahead, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think the long-term aim will be to keep the UK together. I think Charles as king will be as keen on that as anybody else, and either Conservative or Labour governments will be very enthusiastic. I think that will happen. I think it's Nicola Sturgeon has never managed to get a sustained majority anyway for independence in Scotland, and the longer Scotland and the UK are out of the EU, the harder it'll be for her, I think. So that'll be okay. And in Northern Ireland, different polls give you very different results, but the more authoritative Life and Time survey, which is based on detailed interviews with people, shows something like a 2-to-1 majority for staying in the UK. So despite all the fuss and bluster that we get about a united Ireland, it seems to me a long way off. But those will be the issues, and they will keep bubbling to the surface, I think, for many years yet.
Declan de Bredon, you're the author of a book on Sinn Féin. Do you see it as a long way off a united Ireland?
I would see a referendum taking place in 7 to 10 years' time. Don't forget that Sinn Féin are now the biggest party, the most popular party south of the border, the main opposition party, and they look in a very, very strong position to be the main party of government after the next election. And then in the north, you have they are the biggest party in the Northern Ireland Assembly. So, I can remember 1997, Sinn Féin had one member in the Southern Irish Parliament. The tectonic plates are shifting. So, and they will be pushing like crazy for United Ireland on both sides of the border. And but they will have to persuade a significant element of the pro-Unionist population and largely Protestant population in the north to agree to a united Ireland. And in fact, in terms of the monarchy, they haven't said this, but I could see a situation where they might say, okay, we'll rejoin the Commonwealth, because that would give the British monarch a position in relation to a united Ireland, but it wouldn't interfere with the independence of the 32-county independent state, because the Commonwealth is full of independent states, whose independence is not reduced in any way by the fact that the British monarch is the head of the Commonwealth.
Jeremy Stubbs, the concept of a united Ireland rejoining the Commonwealth, what do you think of that?
Well, firstly, there will only be a referendum in Northern Ireland when the Secretary of State sees that opinion polls indicate a majority in favour. And as we've already heard, we're not there yet.
Secretary of State from London, let's just be clear.
Indeed, exactly. I think what we're mainly going towards is a situation where people don't mind so much where they are, as long as they can go on living in peace and prosperity. Just a small point, but we know that Prince Charles has written a book, the title of which was Harmony. Perhaps a naive sort of word to use, but I'm sure that's the idea in his mind, and he'll be trying to convert other people to it.
When you heard Katie Hayward talk about the concerns of younger people in Northern Ireland, what does that tell you?
Well, I think what we're hearing really is that people who are continuing to entrench their positions in a very extreme ideological way are going to turn into dinosaurs. That people, from whatever side you are, you've got to make yourself relevant. Sinn Féin campaigned in Northern Ireland on the cost of living, on things that people care about for their day-to-day survival and comfort. And people have got to realise that those considerations are very important for everybody, especially the young.
So this is the counter-argument to vitriol sells.
Yes.
All right. Well, that's a positive note. Jeremy Stubbs, we'll end it there before it goes south. I want to thank you. I want to thank as well Graham Gudgeon for being with us from Cambridge, Katie Hayward in Belfast, Eglin de Brayton in Dublin. Thank you for being with us here. Our coverage of the build-up to the Queen's funeral next Monday, of course, continues on our website, france24.com.